Let's just get right into it. Let's talk about the issue that's we're all dealing with in one way or the other, the coronavirus. How do you think the federal government has handled dealing with the virus? What are two things you think they've done well, and maybe two things you think they could do better?
Well, I think it's very disappointing and tragic for everyone to suffer 220,000 deaths, but we had early warning and could have been much better prepared. And I believe the federal government and this administration should have been more strategic in deploying the federal stockpiles of necessary PPE and ventilators and other equipment that we needed to mitigate the spread of the disease. And also, the federal government could have stepped in and helped us to, once again, in a more strategic way, ensure that we were not causing municipalities and hospital systems and states to compete against each other for this necessary equipment. You know, we had a lot of frontline workers who couldn't access the masks or the other protective gear that they needed to stay well when the outbreak was first being experienced. And that caused just so much expense and human impact as well. And as for what we're doing better, I was really pleased to see Governor Holcomb in our state call for everyone to wear a mask. I believe that when he first began to approach our state's response, he really looked at the data. And he was looking at those markers such as, you know, how many hospital beds are available, how many ICU beds are available, how many ventilators do we have, and those are really the critical data points that we need to work from moving forward. So I hope that at the federal and the state level that everyone stays attuned to the evidence before us so that we can continue to fight this pandemic.
We need a mask mandate at the federal level, and should there be penalties for not wearing a mask?
Everyone should be wearing a mask. It's just the American patriotic thing to do. It helps you, it helps me, it helps everyone that we love. And I think if we just stepped up and took on our responsibility as American patriots and just wore our mask because it's the right thing to do, you know, that should be enough. It should not be political. Well, I believe it's been politicized, and it's become almost, you know, a show of support for one candidate or another, the wearing of a mask. And this should be about protecting ourselves from a deadly disease.
In that vein, a big issue before Congress right now is this second round of stimulus payments. So if you get to Congress, what should the government be doing? What should Congress be doing early next year to get the economy strong again and back up and running?
Well, sooner rather than later, we need to pass another bill to protect particularly our small, medium-sized businesses and also individuals. I mean, we could be facing an eviction tsunami, for example. That's not good for anyone. And I think of the restaurant and hospitality community. I've been gathering with some of their leaders to listen to their concerns about what happens when patio weather is over. How can they keep their doors open? And we're looking at some estimates that we could lose 75 to 85% of our independent restaurants over the winter. But as Congress responds, I think we can be more mindful and effective too if when we do pass more support during the recovery phase of this, particularly for businesses, to first put small and medium-sized businesses in line for that funding and support first. You know, the entities that are too big to fail, they can wait. But our small and medium-sized need to go first. And we also need to grant greater flexibility with those dollars. So yes, you can pay payroll, but you need to also sometimes pay short-term debt, pay for supplies and inventory, pay rent. And Congress needs to, once again, be more strategic and more urgent, honestly, with this kind of aid to stem any additional economic negative impact for our country.
Within Congress, what would you do? What needs to be done to kind of heal the partisan divide we see right now within the Congress and frankly across the country?
You know, in my work in the Indiana General Assembly, I passed more than 60 bills, and every single one I partnered with a Republican co-author, co-sponsor, and I'm very proud of that. And I'm going to take that experience and ethic with me to Washington. Now, I was serving the overwhelming minority. I believe when elected for the first time, I'll get to serve in the majority, and I'm going to pay it forward. You know, there are a lot of good ideas in Congress. There's some rotten apples too, but I'm going to look for those good ideas and good people on the other side of the aisle, and I'm going to help them get their good ideas passed, just like Republicans here in Indiana helped me. And I find when you can build professional and personal trust and reach across the aisle, you can get really good things done. And I fully intend to join the bipartisan problem solvers caucus. I've already spoken to their leadership about my intention. That's a bipartisan caucus, 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans, that actually even right now are pushing for smart COVID relief and other measures that will really benefit Americans in a bipartisan, smart way.
Can you think of a specific time when you were in state government, a time that comes to mind where you reached across party lines in an issue that was particularly difficult? Does anything come to mind?
Oh, so many things. But, you know, I find most issues are not Republican or Democratic. They're human. You know, Republicans and Democrats, independents, libertarians, all of us, I'm sure, are united in wanting to fight the scourge of sexual violence against children. And so I did my homework and reached across the aisle, and my colleague, Republican Ben Smaltz, passed a bill that says here in Indiana, if you're convicted of a sexually violent felony against a child, if you're a child pornographer, if you've sexually assaulted a child, you may never again set foot on school property. And that's just about keeping our kids safe. And I think when you look at how high the stakes are and you look at some of the solutions that our state and our country need right now, that it's just necessary that, you know, set pride on the shelf and do your homework and be a good person and reach across the aisle. And that's what America needs right now.
Tell me about your position on abortion. What, if any, restrictions would you support placing on it?
Well, I'll tell you, you know, I was a 19-year-old girl, and I remember taking a home pregnancy test that I bought at a local drugstore. And it took, you know, not even 30 seconds for that positive plus sign to come for me. And I knew my life was forever changed, and I didn't know what to do. But I can tell you, I don't believe that any politician belonged in the doctor's office with me. And I had my son. It was the best decision I ever made in my life. But I think we need to trust women and keep politicians out of those doctors' offices with them when they're facing just dire and awful choices.
Let's talk about the Supreme Court. The death of Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg, the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to replace her. We've heard discussions surrounding expanding the court. Thoughts of that? Would you be in favor of that?
Well, we haven't expanded the court since the late 1800s. So I'll tell you, once again, I'd be doing my homework and looking into what is best for the United States of America. It's interesting that the forefathers and the authors of the Constitution really left those powers with Congress. And I think that's going to take a lot of study. And I don't think we should jump into any rash reactionary decisions because we've been experiencing this disappointment right now in a way that leaders in the Senate did not follow precedent. So I think we need to take a moment, have a breath, and really map out what's best for America and consider just how important and significant these kinds of measures would be and take the time to think about it.
Okay. A week after the election, the Supreme Court is going to take up the Affordable Care Act. Would you vote to amend or cut it? And if you did, what plans would you propose to replace it?
Well, this is the biggest area of difference between my opponent, Victoria Spartz, and myself. And so she's campaigned on overturning the Affordable Care Act. I believe we need to keep it, primarily because in our district, Indiana 5, we have 329,000 people under the age of 64 today who have pre-existing health conditions. And particularly during a pandemic, I think it's irresponsible to overturn the Affordable Care Act. That could leave these people here without healthcare coverage. And we just can't have that. I'm going to support any plan that allows people to keep their private health insurance if it's working for them. Hopefully make that more affordable. But for those that don't have health insurance, we do need a public option so that everyone can go to the doctor, pay for that visit, pay for the therapy and the medicine that they need to be well, and have it not break the bank.
Let's switch to another widely discussed topic. In the wake of the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at the hands of police this year, there have been calls for police reform and defunding the police. What do you think you could do in Congress to advance either of those ideas, those measures?
Well, to be very clear, I do not support defunding the police. However, there are some measures that we can take now that I think will bring enhanced comfort and security for all Americans, but particularly African Americans. And first, we need universal body cameras for law enforcement officers. And I really applaud Governor Holcomb for moving to ensure that all of our state troopers over the coming year will have active working body cameras. But clearly, after watching the traumatic death of George Floyd, those minutes of watching him slowly lose his life, we've got to end chokeholds. They really don't have a place in law enforcement. They bring far too much tragedy than good. But also thinking about so many of our cases here too, ending no-knock entry, particularly for drug offenses, could also prevent a great deal of unnecessary trauma. And those are three measures where I would focus right away.
Is systemic racism a problem in this country? And if you think it is, what can we do at the federal level to address it?
Well, of course, we have systemic racism in this country. And I just think about our state and our own history here, where 100 years ago, half of the Indiana General Assembly and our governor were outed for being members of the Ku Klux Klan. Why is this so important? And why does it demonstrate systemic racism? They were the people responsible for writing our laws in our state, many of which are still on the books. And we cannot continue to kick this can down the road. And metrics that I'll be looking to make progress on right away are helping communities of color, particularly African Americans, have greater opportunity to build up personal wealth and pass that along generationally. We've got to help support people on the front end of life. I mean, it's very clear. The evidence is clear. You've got to be learning to read by the time you're 7, reading to learn after the time you're 7 years old, and you need to earn a high school diploma. If you don't, it's an economic death sentence. And so we have to pay careful attention to that evidence and also these communities to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that all Americans can enjoy economic success.
Speaking of children, according to several reports that came out this week, the parents of 545 children separated at the U.S. border still can't be found. Reaction to that and what should be done? What could Congress do to reunite those families?
The United States must stop separating children, little kids, infants from their families at the border. We just have to. And this is not an American value. Think about those poor children missing and yearning for their moms and dads out there, their families. It's awful. I believe that we need to post haste, put the full force of Congress behind an effort to first reunite those families. But this is an issue that's bigger than just the 545. And we need a policy change to ensure that our youngest and most vulnerable are not separated from their families by no fault of their own here. They need their families to take care of them, and the United States needs to help that to happen.
We've seen increasing number of gun permits and gun ownership. Should Americans be able to own semi-automatic and automatic weapons?
Well, you know, I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment, but I've also spent my career working with children and kids. And I'll tell you, if you talk to teenagers today, certainly while they were still going to school in person, they'll tell you they're scared. They're afraid that school violence, this gun violence, is going to happen to them next. And, you know, we experienced in this very district a school shooting in Noblesville. So I think any measures that we can take to provide enhanced safety are key. And certainly that does include limiting high capacity magazines and high capacity weapons. Why? Because this is where the high kill counts come from in school shootings and shootings that we've experienced at movie theaters and people's workplaces.
What do you think the biggest issue facing constituents in the 5th District is? What are the top things that you would address if you got to Congress?
Healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. I already mentioned the 329,000 people in our community, in this district, who have pre-existing health conditions, and so many people living without health insurance during this pandemic. We have to provide an option for them now. And I lived for years as a young single mom without health insurance myself. And I know the anxiety and the fear of knowing you're just a sore throat or a broken bone or, you know, a COVID diagnosis away from economic disaster. And I think of the 500,000 Hoosiers in our state in just under 5 weeks during this pandemic reporting for unemployment, and how stressful and scared they must be living through this time. And in Indiana now, we're seeing our COVID diagnoses and deaths going up. We've got to do something to ensure that all Americans can go to the doctor, pay for those visits, and afford the medicine that they need to stay well.
What do you see as the biggest threat to this country, to Americans, something that maybe keeps you up at night?
Well, the pandemic is a terrible worry for so many, particularly as the deaths continue to climb. But also, we have so many unknowns with the economic fallout as well. We're still living through the safety net period of this disease, and we don't yet have that vaccine. And when we do, and I hope that we have it soon, by many reports we will, it's going to take a long time to distribute the vaccine to everybody that needs it. You know, when we faced the polio crisis in the 1950s, it took several years to distribute that vaccine. So the impact on people at the human level for our health, and also on business. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, we might lose, for example, 75 to 85% of our independent restaurants, other small businesses that could shut their doors and never reopen. And we're going to have to be prepared for that recovery as well.
Support term limits, and if so, how long should someone serve in Congress?
I'm very open to term limits. I also think our priority needs to be getting dark money out of politics. And I bet everyone watching this right now just wants to throw up in their socks every time one of these hateful dark money commercials comes on their television, either, you know, for or against me or my opponent. It's clear that we should not have these out of area people coming in to be able to spend in this race. Legally, they can't coordinate with the candidate, but we've got to level the playing field there in so many ways and underscore and shore up the integrity of the election process.
How should we address foreign interference in our elections?
Well, certainly Congress has a role, as do members of the National Security Cabinet in whatever presidential administration would be facing. But it's clear technology is a wonderful thing. It helps us to be more efficient and more accurate, but it also opens the door to so much interference, whether that's through foreign actors on social media, or even, as we've learned, attempts to interfere with the process itself. and the data that the secretaries of state around our country are trying so hard to protect. I believe that now Congress needs to appropriate funds so that every secretary of state all across our country has the necessary means they need to ensure a safe election of integrity.
What's the single biggest factor that influenced your desire for public service, to go into public service? What in your background, the single biggest factor, do you think influenced you?
You know, I've been working for children all of my career, and I wouldn't be here if there weren't a couple of women along the way that helped me. And they put together a childcare consortium. So when I was a single mom, I could work the jobs I needed to pay my way, pay Owen's way, put him through school, and put myself through Purdue University as well. And that's why I've always had a career about paying it forward. And when I learned through my work with a global NGO dedicated to public health and children's issues, that Indiana had some of the worst rates of infant and maternal mortality, worse than most states and most developed nations, I knew I had to leave that job I loved and start working here in our community to make the changes we need so that we can have healthy families and make everybody allow everybody to have a greater opportunity for success in life here.
You know, there's a lot of talk right now, red states, blue states. If you look on Facebook, you just see bickering about all kinds of issues. Do you think Americans are divided right now? And if so, what needs to be done to unite us as people?
Oh, sure. You know, all the time people say, like, how am I even going to talk to my family at Thanksgiving? You know, we're all just fraught, I think, with this constant news cycle. And what I hear most is just like the fatigue of all this bickering and bantering. And people are just so nostalgic, I think, for America to be boring again. And I think everyone, you know, no matter what side you're on, red or blue, like, people just want to forget about who the president is for a day, you know, and turn off all of the constant drama. And, you know, I'm no different than everybody else.
Thanks for spending some time with us this morning and talking about your take on issues that affect Hoosiers. We really, really appreciate it.